This is a big round of discussion here at the Adenauer Foundation, a political foundation, and at the former top politician Volker Beck. It would be strange if there was a conference where politics doesn't play at the end. It would be kind of absolute surprise. We have heard very clearly that this is an important political issue, and therefore it was very important to put and organize a political discussion at the end that takes up a few of these issues discussed, and maybe if at the end there might be some recommendations for political actions, we would not be at despair of that. And even if the party that is close to us does not play a very special role here, but the timing for this conference was not that bad, because we are now in the process of coalition negotiations, and maybe we can also discuss certain things. The past, I do not want to repeat what was discussed over the past 1.5 days. What can be done politically? What potential is in existence in the field of politics? One could call it language politics. In cultural politics, are we doing the right things? Have been decisions taken that do not meet our responsibility historically? And what can we do in order to change that? And in order to answer all these questions, we have put up a balanced panel of political representatives. We will introduce them to you. Let me start with the Vice President of the German Bundestag Parliament, Petra, and she is an original Berliner, and this is mentioned in her CV. Since 1998, she is member of the German Bundestag, and it does not happen regularly that Christian democratic politicians do commend with full conviction politicians of the left-wing party, but her commitment for Jewish life in Berlin is really commendable. Whether this also for Stiftung Synagoge, Heinz Galinski Foundation, her commitment for the German-Jewish relations. When I was the head of the CAS office in Jerusalem, I could see that well. And I want to add that with her passionate fight for Jewish interests, but she is an exception in her party. She's here not for the first time, but for the third time. And we as Rhineland people, we speak already of a tradition, if that is the case, 3 times to have a visitor. I'm very happy to have you here. I'm also very happy to have Michaela Engelmeier here. She is her own superlative. She is the first General Secretary of the German Jewish Society, and for many years she has been a member of parliament on behalf of the SPD, and she was a very active member of the German Israeli group of parliamentarians. And there's another interesting detail. There's also another fun fact about her life. Michaela Engelmeier was a very successful sports person. She was a judo athlete and was very successful in the women's team. And she also headed the office of Maccabi Germany. Welcome to you, Ms. Engelmeier. With a particularly great pleasure, I would like to welcome Peter Harry Carstensen as a representative of the party. We are close closest to, and he is actually perfect to discuss this topic because he was the prime minister, and he also is the officer of anti-Semitism in his federal state. It is not usual that high-ranking politicians do not just retire, but take a full commitment and do a hard job afterwards. A fun fact of him, intensively, whenever he has got a little time, he deals with Low German and Frisian. Moin, Mr. Carsten, that is the greeting phrase in Schleswig-Holstein. And after Peter Harry Carstensen, I would like to welcome Gösta Nissen, because he also comes from the north, born in Hamburg, and family links in North Frisian. For 2 decades, you have worked for an association of local dialects, and for us, he is a high-ranking representative. He is the General Secretary of the Minority Secretariat of the Danes, Sorbs, Sinti and Roma, and Frisians. We are very happy to have you here. FDP, Jewish Life and Israel. Frank Rosmeier, he was born in Chemnitz, comes from the Erzgebirge region. Then he is the head of FDP in Saxony, and after 2017, he is now for the 7th time member of the FDP parliamentary group. And right now, he has a very interesting side job. And we hope that he will give us more details. He is in the working group of foreign security policy of the coalition negotiators. And he is a talented trumpet player. And he has also proved that during his military service in a brass band, and he still plays the trumpet. And as a person born in Munich, I am happy not to be the only person here from Bavaria, but Marlene Schönberger from Landshut. She is a brand new member of the Deutsche Bundestags for Bündnis 90, the Greens. But she's experienced in local politics, but also in various positions in the Green Youth and as a representative in the Council of States. And she also studies at the Geschwister Scholl Institute in Munich. And after her studies, she also did some research. And there's also an interesting detail. She has a great passion for Iceland horses, and for a long period of time, she was a trainer, coach, and dealt with the grooming of horses. Welcome to you as well. Let me suggest to discuss among ourselves at the beginning, and if we have still time left, then we would also like to involve the audience. Mrs. Powell. So at the beginning, one should always start with a seemingly harmless question. Well, you are the only Berliner here. And yesterday, unfortunately, we could not listen to Andres Nachama about Yiddish in the Berlin jargon. So how Yiddish is your idea of Berlin? And how did you get in touch with this topic? So it's a very rare fact. I'm a true Berliner because my father also was born in Berlin, and this is really a very rare case. It's a pity that you didn't hear the paper of Andreas Nachama, because I read the book by Andreas Nachama about Jewish and Yiddish Berlin jargon. But I must confess that until 1990-91, I was not aware of the fact that these words, such as Meshuggah and others, are of Yiddish origin. At the end of the 1980s, I was faced with a situation that in the GDR something happened. The decision was taken to build the Centrum Judaicum. And in 2020, that I would become the chairwoman of the curatorium of Centrum Judaicum. I didn't dare to believe that in those days. But in fact, it only started in 1990 that I got in touch with this topic in politics in the Volkskammer, the last East German parliament. On the 18th of March 1990, it was elected for the first time democratically. And there was a discussion going on about the guilt and the blame of SED vis-à-vis Jews, because it was assumed until then that GDR, the East Germany, was per se was but protecting Jews. But actually, I must say that my friendship with Gerhard and Alice Zadek. Gerhard Zadek, he was the last survivor of the Gerhard Baum resistance group, who at GDR times fought for the fact that the memorial stone for the Gerhard Baum group in the Lustgarten was correctly named later. Joachim Zelle for CDU, and Petra Pau made sure that not only the communist resistance is reminded of, but that it was a Jewish young group of resistant fighters, and also that working life was closely connected to Jewish life. That is to say, I do have different access ways, and what has been discussed here highly interestingly yesterday and today. I listened into the discussion yesterday occasionally, but Yiddish culture and language, I learned more about that through friends, and so this will be my only long answer. I promise to be shorter afterwards when I'm asked something else. The Jewish Berlin, whether it is the Scheunenviertel or the relationship to the Moses Mendelssohn Gymnasium and the history behind that, I only learned that in the 1990s and the years 2000. I found things out for myself, but I also learned many things through friends. And as we discussed about culture earlier on, I used to be a teacher in the GDR, but this didn't play any role, Yiddish culture and language. Well, there was always a remembrance of communist resistance, but Jewish resistance didn't play any role whatsoever. Jewish history, Jewish culture and language, all that did not play any role whatsoever. And if at all. It was just instrumentalized. This actually means that this was a thing that opened up to myself only after the 1990s or so, but it has all turned out to be great. Mr. Carsten, one might reproach us that we are Berlin-centristic. Let us go to the north. At the beginning, I said that you are dealing and analyzing Frisian and Low German, and also as the Minister President, you had the task to protect this language, which is under particular protection, as well as Danish. What is your personal relationship between these languages and the Yiddish language? You really looked into that very analytically. We have learned yesterday that a term like angeschickert is very well known in northern Germany. And a second question from your experience as a Minister President of Schleswig-Holstein. It might be a two-sided coin. The protection of minority language might also be an instrument to distribute power. But there are also moments when a minister president has to take a decision. Well, I don't know whether it has got something to do with power, and that you have to so it is a matter that goes for granted that you speak Frisian when you go to the North Frisian Islands, because otherwise you would not understand it. I brought an example to you, not just to show you what languages we have, but in a small region such as North Frisian, there are 5 different languages spoken. Can one see that? I don't know whether this was written down. Here you see 5 different languages. We also have an audio file. High German.
Der Tiersmog-Vormann.
Frisian.
Plattdeutsch.
Low German.
Deren Sito-Andisch. Reichsdänisch.
Reichsdänisch.
Der Verbord.
Sønderjysk.
Pich. Sirra der Verburt. Hochdeutsch. Das
High German.
Friesisch. Der Hingst lebt unis Feen.
Frisian. Low German.
Unse Fan.
Reichsdänisch.
Boas Gräsmark. Sønderjysk.
Sønderjysk.
Boas Fan.
Thank you very much. This was Volker Falkings. So he comes from Fur Island, and he is one of the chairmen of the Fairing Foundation at Fur Island, and he gave me these examples because I wanted to show you, because these are languages that are spoken in our region. Language is not only spoken, but it is spoken in order to be heard. Otherwise, you can sing in your bathtub, but here it is heard. When I'm at Fur Island and they speak their local tongue, I'm out of that conversation. So even though it is not far away. So I was born in 1947, and in the 1950s I went to school. It was a political decision in northern Friesland to learn Danish, or it was also a political decision not to learn Danish. So a certain separation, and fortunately, it has been overcome. These languages are spoken there, and therefore the regional government can also maintain it in schools, in kindergartens, and it can only be done when parents also speak the language. We cannot do it only by schools and kindergartens, and that is the difference to Yiddish. Schleswig-Holstein does have a Yiddish culture. with the safeguards that were brought to Hamburg. Altona used to belong to Holstein, and the city of Glückstadt, 405 years ago, it was founded by Christian IV, who fetched Sephards from Portugal in order to create a competition to Hamburg. Friedrichstadt was founded 400 years ago. We had the anniversary this year. It was founded by Frederick III. According to a Dutch example, with partly 20 confessions who lived there. And what is so sad these days is wherever there was a Jewish founding culture, there are no Jewish congregations anymore. That's to say, there are no people who form communities and can speak Jewish. Yesterday, I had a phone call with Mrs. Lichensky of one who came from Ukraine, and I asked her, "Is there still a Yiddish spoken? What do the members of your congregation speak? What do they speak? Yiddish?" "No," she said, "they speak Russian." They speak Russian because then they can make themselves understood. And that is the problem here in the Frisian, in the case of Low German, Reichsdanish. Sounds strange, but Reichsdanish is the language, the official language. I think Christian III, he spoke there as official Copenhagen dialect, and they have got many dialects, and Sonderjüdisch is one of them. And we can maintain these languages because they are spoken. And our problem is, Mr. Klein, that some do not want other people to. Don't want to hear other people speak. As long as letters need to be addressed in neutral envelopes, as long as 7 days a week for 24 hours, there are containers with police officers standing in front of synagogues. As long as it doesn't stop that Jewish cemeteries need to be fenced off. We would also be afraid that this anti-Semitism also is a reason why Yiddish is not spoken any longer, not even when Yiddish people sit together, Jews sit together. What I can tell you is that the discussion that I've heard here today used to be a very academic one. Maybe that is the reason why I didn't understand it, at least partly. Doesn't matter. For me, language is part of identity. And identity, the title of the conference is How German is Yiddish. There was a discussion recently at FÖR whether tourism is still so well recognized, but of course they live on tourism, and tourism also makes the apartments expensive. There was somebody saying in the discussion, which was organized by the newspaper, and somebody at FÖR said, so the immigration to the island should be limited. The Frisians, we are no Germans. Why don't you leave us alone? And so far, the question how German is Yiddish is a good question. You can certainly think about it.
Thank you. You had the catchword anti-Semitism in your mind, and I would also like to take a look at the political problems. Ms. Engelmeier, Ulrich Steinke, in many of the Yiddish words which we discussed in these 1.5 days, and he wrote in his book of anti-Semitism in his in language, he complained that some of the words are rather having a pejorative denomination. As one example, he said Sachan in Yiddish which in Yiddish is actually a neutral word for trading without any negative aspect. And out of this, in German use, schachern, the word schachern developed, which actually has a negative connotation. Sometimes they even do so in coalition negotiations. On the other hand, cultivating Yiddish can without any doubt also revive Jewish life. So do you think Steinke is too pessimistic or too negative? Should politics orient itself alongside Steinke and when retain from promoting Yiddish culture, or is it also a way to fight against anti-Semitism? Yes, Yiddish is a way to fight against anti-Semitism. You have just mentioned the negative connotation of some words. Mishpuke, for example, which is the family. When Germans use it, it's generally they mean it in a negative sense. So that has to do with a lot of things. It's about hatred towards Jews, the language, and it happened to me myself that in my own party, when in a speech I once said a Yiddish sentence, somebody told me later from my own party, why are you talking about your Jews? I did understand it, but I did not understand what he was saying. So this is, of course, a thing which frightened me. I do estimate Mr. Steinke, but we shouldn't hide ourselves. I think hiding ourselves and outing oneself. So I know a lot of friends who are Jews. They never in their lives had told anyone that they are Jews. Why? Not because they are ashamed, but because they are afraid. And especially in these times, this is even understandable, I must say. My relationship with Yiddish is, I've got an uncle of 95 years in Israel. He still speaks Yiddish, and when I visited him for the first time as a youth, by the way, I was there with the judo team, and we had a fight in Israel, a competition there. And I met my uncle, and he told me, well, I actually did understand him, with some difficulties though, but I did really understand what he wanted. So I think we have to show this much more, and especially this conference, how German is Yiddish. To be honest, I'm also annoyed that Yiddish is not considered a German language officially, and I think we urgently have to work on this so that to make this happen, because that will also have its effect. We all know that 200,000 Jews from the former Soviet Union who migrated into Germany have no recognition because they have never spoken a German language and because they are told that Yiddish is not German. So I think we have to fight for this, all of us. I think it's great. I have a friend, she's teaching Yiddish. I'm coming from the Cologne area. Gummersbach is actually the district town. And I've got a friend there who's teaching Yiddish courses. And she's got a lot of Jewish children who are being taught Jewish, but also others. And sometimes they say, well, these are words which I heard somewhere, like Gauner and others. I don't have to mention all these words which came into German from the Yiddish language. And we have to do more about this. Thank you very much. We will come back to the question in a minute, how German is Yiddish, also in connection with this Foreign Pension Act regarding the recognition of Yiddish. But I would also like to speak about the memorial culture. It is, of course, incredibly important to have this honest memorial culture, which is not just a ritual, but it always bears the risk that Jewish life, which is lively and active in our life, can be considered too much from the perspective of victims. Although even especially in this anniversary year, we should strive to consider it as part of the German culture and history, and appreciate this contribution. So what can be done by the Yiddish language in this context? And be honest, are we doing enough in order to underpin the relevance of this language officially in this country? Because you had looked at me, I thought this question was addressed to me. Yes, indeed. Well, of course, that is not enough what is happening. We Germans are world champions in memorizing the death Jews. That is clear, and it's very easy because we can't see them anymore. And across all the parties, you can take your position. But the problem is when you come across or let's say, Holocaust survivor Levy, when you believe him. It has happened, so it can happen again. Of course, we have to look how in the current times we can really not only stand behind Jewish culture, or as Cem Özdemir has said in front of the Brandenburg Gate. So how can we really influence current politics? And this will be very interesting in the next days. What can we do in order to really unite us with the Jews? Because this doesn't happen everywhere. We can just see how we vote at the UN. Are we really voting along the lines of our friends in Israel? Are we voting along the lines of other people? What is our relationship with the UNHCR? Shouldn't we say, of course, we like to give money, but only in order not to spread anti-Semitism? This could be done. And then we can, of course, see, we could take a look in our school textbooks. So if you are really serious about it, a lot can be done. Very concrete things can be done. Of course, this is no rocket science. It's just listening and implementing this politically. So, and a lot could be done, and it would very much help. This also involves the recognition, as you have just said. It can't be true. If I'm coming from Chemnitz, you mentioned this. We had an incredible number of Jews migrating to Jewish refugees, but also others who also pretended to be Jewish refugees. Our community in Chemnitz is composed of 90% former Russian Jews, and of course their main language is Russian. And among the young people, it may even be German, but of course, but mainly the generation is speaking Russian. And then I, of course, address the grandparents. Well, language will be gone as soon as the people are gone, but they have not left Germany because they just wanted to live somewhere else, or in Wrocław, or in Ukraine, because they left Germany at a time where people did not want them here. So that does not even start with National Socialism. Everybody is sitting in this room knows the history where Jews were exposed from or expelled from Bavaria, from Worms, from everywhere. So they were expelled, but they did take along their language. But this language of their homes, this is not being recognized as their home language because it's not High German. So now I'm coming from the Ore Mountains. Of course, not everybody is speaking High German there, and still everybody would consider it a German dialect. And Bavaria is also a different dialect, but it's considered as German. And that's why I plea that by law, and of course with Heiko Maas we can do this. I know Heiko Maas is you are counseling him in the background. Of course, we can use this opportunity that we know each other, and then Heiko Maas may already have my arguments at the table, so that is making compromises much easier. And so Ms. Engelmeier also have an incredibly high responsibility to really get things done. As if he did not take part in the coalition agreements or negotiations. Well, but sometimes shadow people are much more important than the real people sitting there. But you know what I mean. But of course, with such a little promotion, one could say, well, but there is a fund for cultural promotion. On the 18th of May, we promoted cultural events for Yiddish in Germany. And there is also the possibility, which we could consider, how to ensure the pension of the 200,000 people who came from Russia to Germany. And there would be one possibility to recognize Yiddish as a language which is part of the German language area. That will solve the problem in one go. And this is what we have to do in the next coalition government. Okay, Ms. Schönberger, I know, I'm fully aware, and it will be your turn soon. Well, especially younger politicians, they hate when they are referred to as being young, but the question is very close because you are by far the youngest person in this group. Is it possible, if we promote Yiddish as a minority language, could we reach out to the young generation and even make them enthusiastic about Jewish life? Or is this too far away from this young generation and what their experiences are? I think it's incredibly necessary that the young generation should awake its interest for this. I worked at the sibling Scholl Institute, and interest is to work against conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism, and we have now the problem that conspiracy theories are spreading deeply into society along with COVID pandemic. Everybody has come into contact with these theories, and they are almost, in each case, they are anti-Semitic, and conspiracy theories use a fiction of Judaism and of Jews, which has nothing to do with reality. And of course, it's not so easy to take such measures such as the promotion of Yiddish as a language and bringing into contact of young people in order to fight against these conspiracy theories. But it's perhaps one measure among many, and you really have to bring home to the people what Jewish life really means. And I think you should not miss this opportunity, especially in times where all studies show that there is increasing anti-Semitism, which use these conspiracy theories as a vehicle. Thank you for this very concise but even deep thoughts. Now, Mr. Nissen, he gets the big part. I would like to speak about a subject that in 1992, the Federal Republic of Germany signed the Charter of Minority Languages in Europe, and the languages of the recognized national minorities, Danish, Sorbian, Frisians, Sinti and Roma in Germany, and the regional language Lower German was recognized. Now, of course, you don't have to look at it from the point of view of Danish or Frisian language, but isn't it strange that in the context of this charter, Yiddish was defining certain countries as protected minority language: Poland, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Finland, and even though there are very few people living in those countries and speaking Yiddish, France is also missing on the list. But why is Germany missing on the list? And first of all, what can be done from your perspective? What should be done? And is this also in your interest as a representative of minorities? Yes, first of all, of course, you're absolutely right in this discussion. Yiddish in Germany is, at least I came across it very late last year. We got some calls on the phone from the Jewish community of Münsterland, why Yiddish is not recognized as a minority language. And so I also got some addresses from Jewish students who formed a Facebook page in order to make Yiddish known as minority language. And they asked me the same thing, and that made me think of it, and I had to think, what is the situation actually? So, of course, if you compare it with other minority languages, well, the situation is that Yiddish, like Romanesque, is a minority language which is not bound to any territory. Most of minority languages have a territorial background, of course. But so there are certain prerequisites which need to be fulfilled according to Article 1 of the Charter. And in order just to take this away, Yiddish is fully fulfilling these criteria, the minority status of the speakers, but it's also important to look at the citizenship of the speakers. That is one of the conditions. The language must be, as they call it, must be an everyday language. So that means that traditionally the language must be spoken by the people in their homes. And then, of course, the number of speakers, that is another criterion which regards the part number 3 of the Charter, which speaks about the funding and promotion and education and justice, that a sufficient number of speakers has to be there, which justifies these protection measures. Those are the criteria. I thought about this in the Yiddish. What is actually speaking against it? I do not want to take a position. It's actually my personal and private opinion, what I'm saying here. Legally, I think there is nothing against this in Germany to recognize Yiddish as a minority language. And the questions which I'd been asked also by this one community which called me, why Jews are not being considered as national minority in Germany. This is, of course, a different question. This is also not the conviction which is it's not always also the will of the German Jews to be a national minority, but they are rather considering themselves a religious minority. But nevertheless, Yiddish can be recognized as a minority language. If you ask me whether it should be like this, two questions have been discussed already. On the one hand, what is the benefit when it comes to the foreign pension question? Is it better to recognize Yiddish as a German dialect, in inverted commas, or should it be considered a close language close to German, or whether we say it's like with the regional minority languages that we might opt for recognition. So I don't really know what would be more beneficial to these political goals. This is worth thinking about. And of course, the question is, might be a minority language might be counterproductive. So if you really look at these claims, but however, if you look at it from the cultural point of view, this is indeed a different aspect. It certainly would be also. So you mentioned the promotion possibilities, etc. So then, of course, we would have the protection of the European Charter, which is already very clear and outspoken, and is, of course, giving it an international standing as rather than a purely German solution. Kind of an agreement or whatever one could make. Of course, there is the possibility to make government agreements with individual German states. That's what they did with the Sinti and Roma regarding their rights. So from this point of view, I think it is indeed possible to have this recognition. The question, however, is cui bono, and how much? This is a very important question. Mr. Minister President, we learned last year that Yiddish does not have any special status in Israel itself. So what was your motivation when you were just shrugging a little bit when he mentioned the promotion? Well, it was the same thing which Mr. Nissen has just said. Who is the beneficiary of this discussion? I have nothing against it. This is, of course, also a political standing which you send to the outside world by accepting Yiddish as another language of a German minority. But whether this is helpful, we know exactly with the Frisian, you can make as many declarations as you want, even in the regional or federal parliament, but if this is not spoken in the families, it's gone. In very few generations, it will be gone. And unless you had islands such as Föhr or like also others on the mainland where there are also different dialects, Boring Frisian, Boring Frasch, Syring, Sulker Frisian, Föhring, Ferring, the Haluna on Helgoland. So if we hadn't these dialects over there, and if people would not really speaking it, when they invite me for hunting in Föhr, and they greet me and they say, well, this is what you can shoot, then I have to have a translator next to me because I'm there an outsider. So if it's not spoken, if it's not maintained locally, no declaration will be helpful. People really don't care whether there is a declaration or not. But determining it from the top down will certainly not work. And that's why I said the first prerequisite is that the Jews themselves should not be afraid of wearing a kippah outside and speaking Yiddish outside. As long as we can't manage this, we will not be able to save the minority language as Yiddish as it deserves. Ladies and gentlemen, you might have thought you learned something about Yiddish, but you learn also a lot about Frisian dialect or language. Interestingly, well, I can't speak Yiddish, sorry, so I can only speak about Frisian. Yes, but let me pass on to Ms. Pau. and I'm now doing what normally in American tribunal movies you should not do because you would get be criticized. So is it not also just about minority protection? Well, I became a little bit uneasy during this discussion, and I admit I'm also impatient, but I would also like to thank you for this conference. And dear Volker, if I may say so, I would also like to thank you for your commitment, because in the past legislation, there was one initiative by the FDP and the Greens and the Linke exactly about the solution of this pension question. And my finding in all these debates has been that you need education. And therefore, you, with this conference, made a very good contribution. The question is now how to spread it, how to put it into the minds of the decision makers, but also in the minds of the judges and lawyers. We heard in these 1.5 days already about the judgments, which actually are a scandal, but also make clear how much education there is about the history of Jews and Yiddish. I don't want to repeat everything because you had explained this in the 1.5 days very well, but if I have had a wish, dear negotiators, and be it in the shadow or be it in the light, please make sure that education, which may be protected by these decisions or by these promotions. I'm a little bit impatient, but at the same time, it has to be introduced into the textbooks at school so that people do not just remember this when it's time to memorize or to think of the death Jews. And the next part is, of course, a question of cultural politics. So what do we want? It may fail, of course. Even if Yiddish is recognized as a minority language, if it's not spoken, it may well be that it fails, but it may also be motivating people, and they may also find allies in order to bring this alive again. So on the one hand, the political decision must be made, and on the other hand, we should really discuss how this can be brought into political culture, etc. Ms. Schönberger. Yesterday, Volker Beck, in his speech, pronounced that it was a Green representative long before your time in 1990. She was dreaming of the Soviet Jews to become our co-citizens who remember who feel reminded of the wonderful sound of medieval High German. Well, of course, that's a long time ago, but initiatives regarding the foreign pensions for these groups are also not been taken, have not been taken, also not from your party. Now you are in coalition negotiations. Should this be a subject? Absolutely, because we have just mentioned responsibility, and you also quoted that there was big happiness about the immigration of Russian Jews, and it's not only a humanitarian gesture of the German government, but also because they wanted to increase the Jewish communities in Germany in order to calm down the German conscience a little bit. So it's unbearable, it's not understandable that these immigrants are now living in a precarious situation. It is the responsibility of the German government to improve their situation, and once recognition of the Jews as part of the German cultural area is one way to solve this problem, we should go along that alley. But apart from the material dimension, this recognition also would be very important, because we all think that Jewish life and Judaism clearly belongs to Germany and to German history. It had always been part of German history. And if at the same time we say that Yiddish is not part of the German cultural area and language area, this is actually what even the German federal parliament has decided, and some courts have ruled like this, that would actually oppose our convictions, and it's actually against what we have heard and underpinned in many Sunday speeches of politicians. So that is something which at the non-material level should be clarified and changed finally. Ms. Engelmeier, it's your turn immediately. I thought so. So let me say at the beginning, as you have just put it so nicely, the minorities, Jewish minorities, when I still was working at the capital office of Maccabi Germany, we were visiting the Maccabi Games in Hungary with a large delegation of 391 Jewish Germans, and we were calling us like this. We were the German Jewish national team, and actually you should not even think of that, because Jews are German Jews in Germany. There is no doubt about that. And I'm sitting here, of course, as representative of the Social Democratic Party. Logically, I did not agree to that, you can imagine. But not only when the German parliament decided like this, Volker, my ex-colleague, and myself, we had a very isolated stand in the group of in the parliamentary group, but we actually did a lot. But I was really pleased that our President Frank-Walter Steinmeier found some very clear words. He said, and if it's really against the law, and I do think it's against the law, we have to correct it. And I'm really hoping for that the influence, and Frank has just said it in the coalition negotiations, I'm so black because I'm only the shadow, and Frank has its yellow sweater, and he's in the negotiation group. So we try to make this happen. We have also the representative of the Greens, and I think we three together can make sure that this is corrected. And if it's just the sentence which you have just mentioned, we just have to correct that Yiddish has to be recognized as German language, and that could solve the problem. And yes, of course, it has to be done. The 200,000 Jews who immigrated to us, to this country, or actually they came back to their roots. And of course, they have to be protected. Many of them are living in incredible poverty. And of course, we have a responsibility which finally has to be tackled. And we have to say, it is now upon us to help you. And we will help you in your life. And so I'm really hoping for these coalition negotiations. Let's see what we can do. Mr. Carstensen, I would like to add one sentence. That the social situation of these Jewish members of the community who came from the East, who are not living in a very good standard, I'm absolutely prepared to do everything. But when it's about thinking that by this kind of measures we can really maintain Yiddish or revive Yiddish as a language and spread it widely, that will fail, I'm telling you, unless we start at the bottom and make sure that Yiddish will also be spoken by the Jewish communities and by the Jews themselves. And if they say it's helpful if we recognize this as a minority language, then of course I'm with you, but don't be so hopeful that this will happen all of a sudden, and this will get a drive which will promote the language by itself among the Jews. I'm very grateful for this exclamation mark, because it was such an incredibly large coalition. At least a drop of bitterness had to be put into this discussion. But if there is so much agreement at this table, I'm not trying to warm up old laundry. So the question should be, why has it taken so much time, even though the subject is always tabled again with such impetus? And what is really possible right now? What is the opportunity, you think, also within your own parliamentary groups? You said just now it's also a question of education. Volker will not certainly beat me. Sometimes there are educational deficits also among MPs. In single cases, I assume. But how can you really make people aware of these problems? What is the opportunity? Which chances do you see in an agenda which we will absolutely full?
It's only up to us exclusively. So it's a one feature of democracy, to put it in relative terms, that people from very normal life, from different social strata and origin, are allowed to take part in political decision-making. I don't have any clue of agriculture, I admit that. Others do have. But whenever, well, we have already put forward positions and brought them into Parliament. This year, on the 18th of May in 2021, we had filed a major application or petition to strengthen Jewish diversity in Germany. And one sub-item was to ensure pension for Jewish immigrants. So it is even laid down in our program. And indeed, as you said, it is not primarily about, maybe it's a bycatch, it's not primarily about strengthening Yiddish, but it is about lifting massive discrimination. In Chemnitz, there are whole districts of Jewish immigrants. They were not contingency refugees, but as they came here as Jewish immigrants, they get much less than other immigrants. Why is there this discrimination? It is clearly said that only those people are entitled coming from a German language circle. And of course, the Jewish family, which in the Soviet Union was also a deeply anti-Semitic state, and that they wanted to assimilate. And somebody who was born like me in 1982 did not speak Jewish like their grandparents, but they spoke perfectly Russian. That is absolutely normal. And then now they cannot tick of the box that they speak perfectly Yiddish, but their parents brought the language with them to Germany. And now you could make a big fuss about the fact how the language of Ashkenazi came by. But the catch of Polish, Russian, etc., it only was getting into the language when the Jews migrated to these countries. And it is absolutely clear we have to make sure that we have to make and bring about some material benefits to eliminate discrimination against Jews, and on the other hand, to bring back Jewish life and language into the society. But of course, with a decision taken by the parliament, you cannot bring back Yiddish to Germany. In the synagogue at Fasanenstraße here in the center of Berlin, there's hardly anybody left in synagogues who speak Yiddish, but we in the FDP party, we are prepared and we are committed to support any activity. In the bottom line, it would mean, as it was yesterday said, when it comes to the act of foreign pensions, the question is wrongly put because it should not be asked. It's a suggestive question. Yes, it is correct. I said earlier on, now I'm impatient. I don't have any patience left. A decision needs to be taken politically, and hopefully beyond this pension question, everything concerned to education and historical knowledge, it needs to be spread further. And I'm completely with you. The conspiracy theories, the new threats to our democracy, but also very specifically to human beings, we have to deal with that from a different point of view. And I'm fully convinced that next to the convictions that we have, the only thing that helps is education from a very young age. Felix Klein, 3 to 4 years ago, there was the common learning platform of the Central Council of Jews and of the conference of culture ministers. And I was very touched because one teacher stood up and said, finally, we have got something where across all the subjects, no matter how they are taught in the different federal states, there is a subject dealing with Jewish life, Jewish culture. My students, they heard for the very first time something about the Jewish when Shoah was dealt with. At the same time, the Jew was always the most frequently used word, and if they wanted to insult somebody, even though they had never met a Jew. But it is education. Everybody has to understand what happens. And impatience. Well, Volker, you were involved when in 2007 with Gerd Weiskirchen, our inter-parliamentary group was found with CDU, CSU, SPD, FDP, the Greens, and the Linke party representatives. And I had raised an inquiry to the parliament to analyze why there are so many attacks at Jewish cemeteries that happen weekly. So we are beyond that. There are expert recommendations and reports how Jewish life can be strengthened, but going across all societal strata. Felix Klein has also presented his first report. And the fact that we have not yet solved the pension question, irrespectively of cultural and language and other aspects, one must really say, make sure that finally something is put on the table and that the parliamentary groups take a decision, because there are so many people who don't have much time left to wait for a decision. Mrs. Schönberger. Let me add one more sentence and fully agree as regards the necessity of educational work, because from a scientific point of view, there are enough studies that show that current day education does not help against anti-Semitism, because it has shown in the study that well-educated and well-off people are not fewer in having anti-Semitic attitudes. That is to say, the way in which we currently educate people in schools is not helpful, and therefore we need different educational programs. We need to speak about the diversity of Jewish life, and we have to do away with certain biases and prejudices in order to avoid the emergence of anti-Semitic attitudes. Mr. Nissen, let me ask you again, and I would like to shamelessly use you and the fact that you are not only in the Minority Secretariat, but for many years you have worked in the media area. Public life is strongly influenced by media coverage. Does Jewish life, and this brings us back to your main job, do the cultural minorities play a sufficient role in media, and what can be done in order to intensify that? Well, this is really a delicate question. It is right, we can never do away with prejudices if people don't know what they are talking about. And the problem is with the minorities. We have initiated something in the Bundestag Parliament, particularly with the federal states, that the national minorities also become part and parcel of the curriculum in schools. It's not about the mother tongue of these minorities, but who are the minorities in order to get more understanding for the minorities. And unfortunately, I have to say, unfortunately, the media, we are also in discussion with MDR and NDR news channels, and they are also channels that do broadcast in regions of minorities. And it is not that easy to get their attraction for the Frisian language. It's really a hard fight to make this theme visible in the media. So, and as regards to Jewish life, well, there are some Jewish newspapers, but they are read by the insiders. But we need to raise the awareness of the broad public, of the majority of the people. Much more could be done in that respect, and much more should be done, in my view. And as regards public radio and TV, they also have a public mission. And I think they took this more seriously when it comes to minorities, national minorities, but also religious minorities or language minorities. Yiddish, it is almost unknown. It's like a secret. What is it, Yiddish? Hardly anybody knows that. This is also a mission of the press and of the public media. And here one should really raise their awareness. So what you discussed earlier on regarding the current initiative in the coalition negotiations, we need a broad approach. We also currently have sent a letter to the coalition partners saying that the national minority and the protection of them needs and should be taken up in the Constitution, in the basic law. There was a petition to bring in a clause of attention, paragraph 28, and when it comes to the rights of children, when changes will be made concerning the notion of race. Here, the notion of minorities has to come in, and the protection of minorities. The claim of Jews in Germany as regards their legal status. I think the coalition negotiations should also tackle that. We would also like to be involved here, by the way. Kind of a shadow coalition negotiations. Unfortunately, the CDU has to lean back. Well, in Schleswig-Holstein, we have done our job. Well, that is true. I must really exclude all the Schleswig-Holstein representatives, the Hamburg, Altona, they as well. I have to take them out of the criticism I express. We also hope, so far we have not yet got any feedback to our letter. So we know that our letter, our petition has been, our motion has been received, but altogether there needs to be media coverage in order to educate people. And in all the editorial boards of media should be convened and invited in order to be educated on this. But as national minorities are rather unknown in the society among the majority, this also holds true for journalists. They would also need education on that. I must say that, honestly, in the Chancellery, there was a meeting dealing with the question how diversity of society could be shown better in the media. And the state minister had invited us, and I was there as a representative of local newspapers, and we should mention examples. And I said, well, what about minority languages, Frisian? Why shouldn't one focus more on that? Then a well-known, renowned Bild tabloid editor looked at me as if I made a joke. It was not the current one, which has just been fired, but the predecessor. And he didn't know that. Friedrich Springer, she is from Föhr, she's Frisian, and the editor-in-chief of Bild newspaper did not know that there is Frisian as a language. And I thought, oh, my goodness, that will get difficult. And as regards Yiddish and the recognition of rights of the concerned Jews, well, I think it would be possible to cause some awareness. It has to be done correctly. So with the coalition negotiations, we do it correctly. We make them come here so that we at least can watch what they do. That was a joke. Mrs. Engelmeier, let me garnish that a little bit. What we said about the media coverage, there was a big chance. The anti-Semitism officer was also in charge of Jewish life in Germany. He's here. 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. Well, this event was also was a chance to highlight Jewish life. This anniversary year, 1,700 years of Jews in Germany, have we done enough, and has it been done? Have we made use of the chance? No, we have not fully used the chance. 1,700 years of Jewish life. Well, 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. So it happened. So at this anniversary year, it started simultaneously with Corona. And it was really a shame. There were so many great events that were planned, and we could not hold them. I don't know whether you noticed that recently there was the Jewish Borchard festival. So huts were built everywhere in pedestrian zones in front of synagogues. So people were very surprised and asked, what is that? And I think that is one way of making people familiar with a Jewish life. Small Waldbrüll, you don't need to know that. But so in Waldbrüll, there was also a sukkah built, which was erected there by our Association of Christian Jewish cooperation, and people were really interested in that, but it was not enough because many events just didn't take place. And on the other hand, there were not enough people attending them. One should have done much more on that. But the events were planned, but even in the press, there was not much coverage of 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. State ceremonies should take place, and it was done, but it was mentioned then in the press on page number 3, for example, in the Cologne newspaper, Oberbergische Volkszeitung, you found these articles on page number 3. It was a pity. Mr. Nissen, you just said, do you know what was, by the way, the most noticed debate in the parliament? It was the speech by Johann Saathoff, who told AfD in low German what the crux is. But by the way, when I got and got to school in 1966. So I tell you, 80% of my teachers, rather only male teachers, were former Nazis. Whether it was the history teachers who told us things that I'm really frightened of even today. So they just covered the history of the Third Reich within 3 days. So there are no acts and former Nazis anymore. I'm also a teacher by profession, but sometimes I've got the impression that not that much has changed. My daughter is 28, my son is 32, and even in their textbooks and in their school classes, Nazi was time and period was rather a marginal topic, and I think that was a major mistake. And the Jew as a word of insult on German schoolyards. It's not only the case in schoolyards. Every weekend when there are football matches of the third league, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian players that speak for Maccabi, they are insulted, they are arrested, partly they are under police protection, and this tells me that we have completely failed in our application. And the public TV and media do not only have the mission to inform, but also the mission to educate. Red Schneider, he made such great coverages on Israel and Jews. And do you know when you can watch those documentaries and TV coverage and programs at 1 a.m.? Nobody actually watches TV then. And here we have to correct things because the lively Jewish life have to be brought back to prime time and TV. Richard Schneider, by the way, he speaks perfectly Yiddish. 1,700 years, Minister President. I need to contradict somehow, even though many events could not be held this year because of Corona. Never before, at least in Schleswig-Holstein, that much has been talked about and written about Jewish life as it was done this year. And it will go on. Maybe that is also due to the fact that 18 months ago we installed the position of an officer in charge of these things. I also noticed that I'm getting approached by people about that, but I'm also feeling quite humble because I've never had the feeling that I thought at the beginning that we have done enough for the Jews, but we have not done enough. And with the help of Jewish communities, we try to compensate. We have minority radios. We have the Frisian radio at Föhr. I should have told you more about my actual home, which is not at Föhr. We have also 2 language traffic signs and nameplates of local communities, but you cannot understand each other. You have heard a few minutes ago how Frisian sounds, but we have to talk about Frisian. We have to talk about Jewry. We have to talk with Jews. Everybody in Schleswig-Holstein has got an opinion about Jews, and whenever I ask them, 90% of them have never ever met any Jew. And that the Jewish program, Meet the Jew, get to the events, to the Rotarians, to the Lions, to the associations of rural women, in order to really grasp, to grasp and to understand, to touch a Jew who tells you something about the Jewish festivals, and that is completely different to when the officer tells you you should be more Jew-friendly. And there's one thing that really makes me very angry. At least once a year we get the news how many anti-Semitic events there were in Schleswig-Holstein. Luckily, not as much as many as elsewhere. But in the courts, then I hear that their flags are burned. But I think a year ago you decided in the parliament that this is a crime. I do not hear that people are indicted and charged with these things. And if there is not the possibility to really tell a potential anti-Semite that this would be the punishment and a fine if you if you are an anti-Semitic action organizer, then one should go into schools and make more. Well, I promised you to allow the audience to raise a question, but at least one question should be raised. Mrs. Kreuzinger, many thanks. It's a fantastic panel, and not only once held it once every 1,700 years, because I would not be there for the second anniversary of. It's a major interest. As Volker Beck said, I'm very euphoric. The public radio and TV, when Islamist persons are supposed or Islamic people are asked to take part in a discussion, Quarks, for example. Well, there was somebody who apologized, and she said they did not know what had happened at the Al-Quds demo. And then on a tweet, she can write down things which are completely opposite. This is not possible. So I wrote and I got in touch with the Council of Broadcasters, and I hope during the next meeting in November this will be dealt with. It's not only a question of school books and manuals, but even the media, they have a major responsibility, and I ask you to put this on the agenda. So thank you. I think it was rather a statement than a question. Very brief. One of the problems is that in Germany for many years we have closed our eyes against pan-Arabic anti-Semitism and left-wing intellectual anti-Semitism. So, but the past 4 years in the political debate, we have also set different spotlights. Right-wing anti-Semitism is brutal, it is fatal. But what we have seen here in Berlin in June, that were deeply anti-Semitic demonstrations, and the fewest of the participants were of German origin. And this is also part of the educational mission. This has got something to do with intercultural aspects and the training and the teaching of teachers. If teachers do not know the highest Jewish and Muslim holidays, then it can't be, because the people who train and educate our kids, they should also be able to teach intercultural things. And this means also that they have to be more tolerant vis-a-vis minorities. And therefore, I'm not having any... I do not understand what happens in the ZDF TV channel, but independence of the press is a high good and needs to be respected. Mrs. Pau has to leave, but well, we have been waiting for a while. I went to school in 1975. I've worked in Berlin and worked in Wilmersdorf. As a teacher, I started working in 1975. Over the entire decades, and I am not just concerned, but it is not feasible anymore. Throughout the decades, we have worked on this subject, and we took part in AGC against anti-Semitism and anti-Salafism. We worked and changed the curricula, as you do know. There were 50 people from Berlin. At the end, there were only 10 people attending because the head masters did not allow the teachers to take that much time off. It was impossible to deal with Jewish diversity. It is nothing new. We did it for decades at schools. For 40 years, I worked in social hotspots. All that is done with pupils, but we are too few teachers, and too few teachers were educated, and everybody else knew when we would retire. And I hardly do have any hope left that the negotiations will end up in something good. The educational policy has come to its end. So many things have to be done. And in Berlin, Jewish life, you can really touch, you can feel Jewish life. And I am volunteering without any money to pass something on. The conference was great, very academic. I've learned a lot, but I've learned things early on. I'm really trusting politicians, even though I do not have much trust in politics. We have come to the end, and I have the extraordinary luxury to have something like last word. No, somebody else is going to take it. So I'm always saying that I would be fired unless I quote Adenauer every time. In 1966, when he went to Israel, he said afterwards something that is almost a programmatic hint to the follow-up to this conference. Those who want to deny our particular responsibility towards the Jews are politically and otherwise blind. They don't know anything of the centuries of Jewish history and their contributions to German culture. And they do not understand the severity of the crimes of Germans in the mass Holocaust in Germany. So for us, it means that such a conference is useless unless it has got concrete consequences. And this means to all of us that we have to do something.